Hey, welcome back. I'm Sean Barr, and at Looking Point, we help IT organizations make decisions around security, networking, and cloud. Today, we're going to be talking about three things you can do, three tips that you can do to improve your network security. Let's go. All right, we're back, and we are talking about three things you can do to improve your network security, prevent malware, prevent security threats, or at least reduce them. The first thing we're going to talk about is firewall policy. The second thing we're going to talk about is DNS security, and the third thing is backups, and then we're going to sprinkle in a few tidbits as we're getting through it. So I'll grab the iPad here, and we'll start drawing. So moving to the network layer, and really just talking about firewall policy as the first thing. We've got an internet connection here with a router and a firewall. We've got a mock DMZ, that would be like for a web server that's facing the internet. And then we've got our internal network, and that is down here, this internal network. And so the first thing is most people that configure a firewall, you have to configure some type of outside based policy, and hopefully your architecture, if you're exposing services to the internet, you've got the things that are facing the internet or accessible from the internet on their own segment, and that segment isolation, that this would be a segment, the DMZ, and the internal would be a segment. That segment isolation prevents someone from getting on this web server and then being able to move across in the internal environment. So if everything's on the internal network and someone gets compromised on the internal network, they could move within the internal network unfirewalled. We'll get into some ways that you can prevent that, but in general, this is typically what a traditional network looks like today. So hopefully you've got that. On the external interface, we've got some type of policy here that says that you're going to allow port 80 and probably port 443. And that will allow web traffic to this web server. Now, what a lot of people don't do is configure policies or limited or restricted policies on the interfaces inside of the firewall. And so here and here, we can limit the amount of traffic that can be initiated or connections that can be initiated either out to the internet, out to the DMZ, or from the DMZ to the internal network or to the internet. And so let's say in the backend network, you've got a database server here. You could configure a policy, very specific policy, that would say this web server can go to the database server on maybe, let's say, 1433 as an example, as a port, and only allow that communication to the internal network, and then say, maybe you allow it to go out to the internet for Windows updates or things like that. You could allow, or any other kind of updates if it's not a Windows server, you could allow specifically www to go to the type of sites you would like and nothing else. Now, doing that will prevent someone, an attacker, potentially getting on this web server and then being able to issue command and control traffic from this server out to other things. And so by limiting this inside interface policy, we'll restrict what this web server can do. The second place that we could enable additional security features is on this inside interface. And a lot of times that we'll see the firewall policy basically just says anything on the inside can go out to the internet. And while that does work, it doesn't limit what these inside hosts can do. As an example, if we added a DNS layer here, the only thing that clients should be going to for DNS resolution would be going to this DNS server. And if they went to this DNS server, then this DNS server will go out to the internet to get resolution for like www.yahoo.com or Google. And so when we get back to this firewall policy, we could add a policy and get rid of this any policy, and we could say our DNS server can go out to maybe other DNS servers on port 53 and we could say TCP and UDP as an example. And then everything else, clients can go, any client inside can go 443, sorry, that's a bad 4, can go 443 and port 80, and that would be your internet outbound traffic. So as an example, to summarize this up, these are a couple examples of how you could restrict the inside network on your firewall from a policy perspective. And really the concept here is to really restrict down to what do people actually need to access from the internet will help prevent, if you get an attacker or a malware type event, it'll prevent what they can do from inside the network in terms of command and control or accessing other resources out on the internet. Another firewall policy that's nice on the inside interface or even on the outside interface, a lot of organizations may not do business with other countries. And so those country ranges or the ability to block those countries out on the outside edge here can reduce the attack surface. So it limits the type of people or the other countries that can get to your services. So as an example, if your website or if you only do business in the US as an example, maybe you don't need people in other countries accessing your website. Now, that could go counterintuitive to what maybe you want to do for your environment, but it is an option to limit what countries can access the edge of your network, and that reduces the attack surface or the types of traffic that can get to your environment. So those are a couple things from firewall policy that I would be looking at in your environment, and hopefully that provides some things to think about when you're looking at what security threats or risks do you have out in your environment. In addition to that, we talked about DNS security. So DNS security, we touched on a DNS server in the inside of the network, but we didn't really talk about what you could do from a DNS server or a DNS lookup perspective. There are services like Umbrella and others out there that you can leverage to restrict the type of sites your clients are going to. So that gives you some control around what kind of content. You can do some content control with DNS security. But in addition to that, they can identify known threats and known bad actors out there from a DNS perspective, and they can restrict those from a security perspective, clients from going to those. So typically domains may be used for malware or maybe used for command and control. They will block those inherently within the DNS security appliance, and that adds another layer of security to your environment. And the third thing is really backup. So a lot of people back up locally to a machine. They may back up to an internal server. Having immutable backup storage or a third device that's physically isolated from whether you have a SAN or maybe local storage on a server, having separated having separate storage where those backups are stored that's immutable, or even just having a separate appliance that backs those up, that maybe you have different authentication methods to it. Maybe you have it isolated on the network so that other hosts can't really access it. It can initiate connections to those clients and back them up, but clients can't initiate connections to it. There are a number of ways you can secure those backups. So if you do have a malware attack or a malware type of event, you could secure those backups so that you can restore, and those aren't going to be infected with that particular malware. So that is it. To summarize it, I said a lot in this video. That's three things: the firewall policy, DNS security, and making sure you've got a good backup that can't really get compromised, or you limit it as much as possible from getting compromised. And that is it. There's obviously a lot of things you can do beyond that, things like network authentication and other things. But if I said anything in this video that you're like, hey, want to know more about that, leave a comment, let us know, and we'll try to get a video out for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. See you later.